Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. It is great to see the numbers growing in the room. Welcome to the 5th National Climate Assessment webinar series. And we are here today to talk about Chapter 23, the U.S. Caribbean chapter. My name is Eliza Lustig, and I'm on the National Climate Assessment team at the U.S. Global Change Research Program, or USGCRP. Before we get started, I want to draw your attention to a note that we'll put in the chat here, which is that, just a second, that audio is going to be disabled for all participants. But if you have questions or comments throughout today's session, please enter them in the chat and we will address them at the end of the presentation. If you have any technical difficulties, please contact Yishen, who is our technical support person today. And please also note that all participants are expected to be respectful and considerate towards others per the USGCRP Code of Conduct. Next slide, please. So with that, I'll kick off our webinar today with some background information about the National Climate Assessment before I turn it over to Pablo Méndez-Lázaro and the other chapter authors. Next slide, please. Okay, so the U.S. Global Change Research Program was mandated by Congress in the Global Change Research Act of 1990 to assist the nation and the world to understand, assess, predict, and respond to human-induced and natural processes of global change. The program convenes 14 federal agencies to advance climate and global change science and to provide useful and usable information to decision makers. Next slide. That same law that established the program also mandates a periodic scientific assessment, which is known as the National Climate Assessment, or the NCA. The NCA is a quadrennial report. It analyzes the effects of global change on several sectors, all listed here, and those are the natural environment, agriculture, energy, land and water resources, transportation, human health, social systems, and biodiversity. USGCRP as a program is charged with assessing current trends as well as projections for the next 25 to 100 years. The NCA is used by organizations and individuals for a wide variety of purposes: national policymaking, risk management in the private sector, local mitigation and adaptation planning, as well as by practitioners, utility managers, and informal and informal education. Next slide. Okay, here are some kind of general characteristics of the assessment. NCA authors review a large body of scientific research from diverse information sources. They synthesize that information and they examine the confidence in our scientific understanding. And they also evaluate uncertainties associated with that understanding. NCA5 was actually written by 500 authors and 260 technical contributors from every state in the nation, as well as Puerto Rico, U.S. Virgin Islands, and the affiliated Pacific Islands. The NCA is designed to be policy relevant. So authors distill their findings into accessible language. They frame their work around risks to people and important resources. But that said, the report is very strictly not policy prescriptive. It does not advocate for a particular viewpoint or any particular policy measure. To that point, the NCA uses a range of future projections to help decision makers understand the fullest possible extent of risk that can be avoided or reduced under different scenarios. And we really leave it up to the decision maker to ultimately determine their risk threshold. Next, the NCA is fully compliant with all applicable federal laws. That includes the Global Change Research Act, as well as other laws that govern things like information quality, accessibility, and transparency. And then finally, the report process involves extensive review, including several opportunities for public engagement, a review by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, and several government science reviews. Next slide. Okay, so this is the NCA5 table of contents. Like previous NCAs, NCA5 covers national level topics, regions, and response actions. So NCA5, it opens with an overview, which is then followed by 2 chapters dedicated to the physical science of climate change. We then have quite a number of national topic chapters, as well as 10 regional chapters and 2 response chapters. Although I'll note that response actions are also discussed throughout the report and not just limited to those 2 response chapters. The NCA5 table of contents has evolved over time, and that's been informed by user input. So NCA5 has added 2 new chapters, one on economics and one on social systems and justice. We also have 5 new focus features: compound extreme events, Western wildfire, COVID-19, supply chains, and blue carbon. We also have several appendices, including one new one dedicated to indicators. Okay, so now that we have gone through some introductory background, it is my pleasure to introduce Pablo Mendez-Lázaro, the chapter lead of the US Caribbean chapter, and he will lead us through the remainder of the webinar today. Thank you, and over to you, Pablo.
Thank you, Alisa. Happy to be here. Thank you, everybody, for connecting, for joining this webinar. I'm Pablo Mendez-Lázaro. As Alisa mentioned, I work at the University of Puerto Rico Environmental Health, the medical science campus. Before going directly into characterizing and describing what we did, or summarizing at least, because in this case we will not have the time enough to discuss all of the different details that we have in this magnificent report, that I would say thanks to all of these authors, right, and the teamwork that we had, including Alisa, Patricia, Greg, and I will not mention all of the different authors because all of them were very important when writing this amazing report that we are sharing today with you. So I would like to acknowledge their time, efforts, and everything what they did. The team rich in diversity, including different genders, different disciplines, social scientists, physical scientists, engineers, planners, from the academia, from NGOs, private sectors, and foundations. So we're very proud to say that the Caribbean region, is one of the biggest team of authors that work in NCA5. We're working with 2 different territories, Puerto Rico and Virgin Islands, both of them located in the Caribbean region. Most of the authors were located and based in Puerto Rico, almost 50%. 50% are based in the US Virgin Islands, mainly in St. Thomas. And 35% are not based in Puerto Rico and Virgin Islands, but are working directly with Puerto Rico and with Virgin Islands in both territories. Those are people probably that are living in Puerto Rico, living in Virgin Islands, and also living in the continental US. Basically, this is what I already mentioned, that the different sectors that are included in this report. So probably we are a little bit biased with the academia. Most of us are working as professors and scientists or researchers in academic institutions, but that doesn't mean that we build alliances and partnership with other sectors in order to design this climate change report for the Caribbean region. So where is Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands? So basically in the Caribbean, right? So we are in the heart of the Caribbean Sea. We are at the 2 different territories that are located who are almost 3.3 US citizens for more than 100 years, although we are territories, we are states, right? So that means that there are some political discriminations, economic discrimination, and racial discrimination that we share as territories in the Caribbean region. We also share the physical hazards related to climate change. We're facing extreme heat, we're facing sea level rise, we're facing powerful storms and hurricanes. But we also have some differences, cultural differences. Puerto Rico has some backgrounds that are more related with the Hispanic tradition. The reason why almost 98%, 99% of the population in Puerto Rico is Hispanic or Latino. We are Spanish speakers in the island, mainly. We have 3 different islands: the main island of Puerto Rico, Vieques, and Culebres, that are also municipalities with less population than the big island, obviously, but they also have municipalities and administrative institutions. In the case of the Virgin Islands, there are 3 main islands: San Thomas, San Croix, and San John, comprising almost 88,000 inhabitants, U.S. citizens living in the 3 islands. So I will go to the next slide. In our chapter, we are recognizing that the Caribbean is already vulnerable to the existing extreme events. We're not only talking on what will happen in the future, but we are already recognizing that these challenges are impacting the Caribbean region nowadays. So we don't need to wait until the next century to see the extreme weather events impacting our region or exacerbating the way on how we're living in both territories. We're seeing those impacts right now, and these extreme events are already affecting the quality of life, critical infrastructure, ecology and biodiversity, human health, and well-being. So from our perspective, one of the things that we're saying is that to deal with it, we need an effective adaptation to support the resilience in the region that can be enhanced by mainly decentralization, shared governance, and a stronger partnership across the Caribbean region and in both territories, Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, and also with the mainland. In terms of what is happening with the climate, we have in our report, and you should be able to see it. I encourage you, all of you, to please go ahead and visit the webpage, download the report, you can read it. It's going to be also available in Spanish in the next couple of months. So I'm inviting all of you to do that. So in this case, we're going to be only summarizing again, as I mentioned at the beginning. So in terms of what we're seeing in the observed and projected climate, you will see information about the temperature, what is happening with temperatures in the Caribbean region, Puerto Rico, and Virgin Islands, and what is happening also with the rainfall, with sea level rise, and how that is being manifest in our region. In terms of temperatures, what we are seeing is that we can confirm the different scenarios and different analyses that have been done in previous studies, that the temperatures are increasing and we're getting warmer in the Caribbean region. It doesn't matter the kind of scenarios that we're seeing. The best scenario will be where all of the nations are able to reduce and minimize the amount of greenhouse gases and the pollution. That means that we should be able to reduce the rate of change and the rate of increasing temperatures worldwide. And the other scenarios are where we're seeing that we continue doing business as usual, burning fossil fuels, and increasing the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And the reason why the rate of change in terms of temperatures are increasing. So we're going to be more warm under the business as usual scenario, and we can be warm, but not that much under if we're able to modify those patterns of consumptions and burning fossil fuels. In the right side of the panel, what we're seeing is the projected and observed precipitation. When we analyze the observed precipitation for both territories, we're not seeing any significant trend annually or seasonally or season rainfall. Not a decreasing trend, not an increasing trend. However, the projected scenarios are suggesting that the rainfall over the Caribbean region is going to be decreasing in the next couple of years, 20% to 30% in some cases. But we need to highlight also that this kind of information for rainfall and precipitation is probably one of the models with more uncertainty for the region. So even though when we're seeing a projected reduction in rainfall and precipitation, when we're looking at the observed trends and the historical data that we have, we're still not seeing that kind of pattern in the region. That doesn't mean that we are seeing drought, we are seeing extreme events, but those are not necessarily significant patterns in the region. And in our chapter, we agree that we have 5 main priorities in our region. The first is that climate exacerbates inequalities and impacts human health and well-being. So we're not saying that climate change is impacting human health and well-being. What we're saying is that we already have some pre-existing health conditions, inequalities, social conditions that are making us more vulnerable to these extreme weather events. And on top of that, so then we need to deal and face the different extreme events that can exacerbate these conditions. We have, in the case of Puerto Rico, we have over 60% of the population living below the poverty level, and in the case of Virgin Islands, it's up to 40% as well. So we have a huge percent of the island that are already living under in dire conditions that are not necessarily related to climate change. But what we're seeing again is that climate change is exacerbating the pre-existing conditions on how we're living. The most affected communities, unfortunately, are the disadvantaged communities. And please note that in the case in the Caribbean, we're not using frontline communities because we believe that using the wording of frontline communities can be masking the underlying causes, the real causes on why these communities are more vulnerable than others. And in reality, it's because they are disadvantaged and underserved because they have been systematically excluded from social services, secure livelihoods, quality education, and other social benefits that help sustain health and well-being. You will see also in the chapter information about how climate change is related to vector-borne disease, zoonotic diseases, non-communicable diseases, and how also it's impacting excess mortality in the region. So please go and visit the chapter, and I hope that you will find enough information to please you. The other thing that is new in the chapter is that we are promoting the One Health approach. And what does it mean, the One Health approach? So when we're talking about climate and health, we don't want to say that humans are more important than other ecosystems in planet Earth. We're saying that we rely on the quality of life of also other kind of ecosystems, healthy plants and healthy animals. So if we would like to promote the healthy quality of life and healthy environments for humans, we need to pay attention also that all of the other ecosystems are in the same conditions, right? So we need them to be in a good shape, in good health as well, right? So this is a global issue, right? But we need to take it down for both territories, adopting this kind of approach for Puerto Rico and Virgin Islands, and also doing the downscaling to work directly with communities that are on the ground dealing with all of these cases, all of the hazards in the Caribbean. Also, we're recognizing how these extreme weather events are interacting on the way on how we do things, the social-cultural factors, and also the institutional components. So the way on how we live, the way on how we are getting exposed, the patterns, behaviors, what we can call also the expo zone, right? And interacting all these social-cultural factors with the extreme events, then we can see how also this is affecting the quality of life, well-being, and human health in the Caribbean region. For more information, again, I encourage all of you to go to the chapter and read it. And now I would like to invite our colleague and co-author as well, Patricia Chardon, to continue with the chapter.
Thank you, Pablo. So I will go over the key message 2, which we entitled Ecology and Biodiversity Are Unique and Vulnerable. This key message highlights the impact and consequence of climate and non-climate stressors on our coastal and terrestrial ecosystem. We consider sandy dunes, beaches, mangroves, salt flats, coral reefs, seagrass beds, and dry and tropical forests. So this ecosystem provides numerous goods and services that are vital to the island economy and the well-being of the residents. So they give provision of services such as food and feed, regulated services such as flood control and air purification, cultural services such as recreation, and supporting services such as soil formation. So I wanted to highlight those services and purposes, but unfortunately, the changing climate is compressing their goods and services. So to mention some of the climate and non-climate stressor, we highlighted in the report the temperatures that the tendencies and the projections are expecting an increment of almost 7 degrees Fahrenheit. They're also indicating the rainfall could reduce with almost 20 to 30% in the worst case scenario. There is a high confidence that the number of intense tropical cyclones will reach categories 4 and 5, and also sea level rise will continue rising, and we have been seeing this with our tide gauges around the region. And also, of course, the ocean is getting more acidic, which is also impacting all this ecosystem. Everything is interacting between each other. Next slide. So the coastal zone, as we are indicating in the report, is home to critical infrastructure such as hospitals, highways, and electrical power plants. In some cases, these power plants can be within 0.6 miles from the waterline, from the shoreline, and with an elevation of less than 6 feet or almost 2 meters, which is not quite, can affect people living on the coast, can also affect the livelihood of these people, and also our day-to-day operations from homes to any type of agency and company. So if we only consider the wave action, this was something of statistics and values that we presented in the report. If you only consider the wave action and intense rainfall from hurricanes Irma and Maria in 2017, over 12% of coral reef were damaged. Approximately 1 to 3 miles of beach were lost, dunes eroded, and almost 30% of the mangroves were destroyed. If we add that the intensive coastal development that we have close to our shore is also exacerbating the damage that we have seen with our coral reef, dunes, and wetlands, then we can see that our natural barrier, our natural protection is damaged, and it will not protect our citizens as well as our infrastructure. So there was a report that we thought to include that shows the benefit of this coral reef. And unfortunately, right now, we don't have it in optimal conditions, but it says that if they keep not continue degrading, that this will be a loss of almost a couple of billions, 172 billions or more. So we wanted to highlight this in some numbers, and I think it shows how important they are, and put an effort and a value of the different initiatives that are running currently to rebuild and bring all that coastal ecosystem alive for our protection. Next slide. So the cumulative effects of this stressor could result in the degradation of aquatic habitat as well as our terrestrial habitats. This can increase the coastal erosion with the wave events. We can see more flooding due to the degradation of coastal ecosystem as well as coastal coral reef and our sand dunes. We can see the tree mortality, alteration in the growth of mangroves and seagrasses, which diminish then the resiliency and active capacity of that. We also include the sediment and contaminant runoff that we have seen due to the deforestation and coastal development. It also impact the land-based activities that, again, it will end in the ocean. So we will have impact to the regeneration capacity, growth, and mortality of our ecosystems. So we highlight some assessment and research that has been done and show advances on how to understand climate change and its effects on the disturbancy of this ecosystem, their composition, structure, and function. So it is crucial to rehabilitate the damages due to coastal climate and also the human effects for future disaster readiness strategy and protects the residents' well-being and livelihood. So climate change is expected to exacerbate, as Pablo mentioned. So we are expecting more degradation in ecosystem if we don't take action. Therefore, the success of a climate adaptation strategies will depend on reducing all sources of stress on the ecosystem, but it seems quite challenging, and there's some points that we highlighted in our report. I will pass to my colleague, Greg Guanel. I think he will talk about the next key message.
Yes, thank you, Patricia. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Greg Guanel. I am the director for the Caribbean Green Technology Center at the University of the Virgin Islands. And so I will talk about the next few key messages. So the one that you see right now is about water and food security. So Pablo and Patricia talked about some of the great challenges for the region, that climate change will pose. Patricia talked about some of the ecosystem challenges to the ecosystem. And so another challenge that we see is the challenge to our water and food security. So as you, the first thing is, as you probably experience for most of you, when we have a hurricane, or even if we have a very, very long drought, those type of extreme events tend to put some stress on our water and food systems. And so what we are saying and what we're finding is that our water and food system are becoming increasingly vulnerable to the escalation of climate change. So stronger hurricanes, severe drought, warmer air temperature, other type of extreme weather will not only damage the infrastructure, but put more stress on the other type of the infrastructure that will have to compensate for what is lost. As you also know, we are very reliant on imported food. Both Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands import more than 90% of their food. So if there is any type of disturbances in the US or in other parts of the Caribbean, like the Dominican Republic or Dominica, from which we import our food, well, we will then have issues in terms of food security. So what happens elsewhere will impact us because we are so reliant on what other people are producing. The reduction in annual rainfall that Pablo discussed at the very beginning, the increasing in air temperatures and the rising sea levels will adversely affect freshwater availability in the future. And if you remember some of the slide that Patricia just talked about, increase in salinity in the aquifer is something that we need to sort of pay attention to, especially if we do not manage our resources properly. So really thinking about those adverse impacts on freshwater ability and how to manage them is going to be very important moving forward. And then lastly, we're saying that improved adaptation effort will benefit from a better understanding of the ways that food and water system interrelate and of the cascading impact generated by climate change. So a better understanding of how those systems work is going to go a very, very long way to help manage some of those negative impact that we mentioned earlier. We tend to look at them in silos. We tend to have, the ag people over here, the water people over there, but they actually are very related. And so really sort of more collaboration between agencies, between groups will go a long way in helping anticipate what's coming. Next slide. So this figure sort of, shows some of the negative consequences that can happen during an extremely wet scenario or an extremely dry scenario. So what we see is that in period of wet conditions, saturated soils, that the figure on the top. So during a wet conditions, saturated soils coupled with heavy rainfall from hurricane and storm can lead to flooding, and in turn, soil erosion and vegetation and crop destruction. So there's some rolling impact that will occur when it's going to rain very hard. The wind and the flood can also damage infrastructure, as I mentioned earlier, needed for food and water distribution. The excessive rain combined with higher sea level, so that's on the coast, affects water quality through the leaching of agriculture chemical and wastewater from septic tank. And so you're going to then have a degradation of the nearshore environment, which can further degrade some of the reef and marine life that provide extreme benefits, immense benefits for us as humans. The figure on the bottom shows what can happen during long period of dry conditions. So dry conditions can increase groundwater pumping for irrigation because you need more of that fresh water that is no longer available in ponds or cisterns. And because sea level is rising and you're pumping and reducing the amount of water in the aquifer, you have more saltwater intrusion that then can lead to negative consequences for that fresh water that you depend on, because now your water can become brackish faster. So really, we're also going to have other type of risks, such as increased risk of fires or increased risk of things, increasing in temperature and catching on fire like we had on St. Thomas at one of our landfill, there will be also negative consequences on people and their ability to grow food or secure water in general. So what we're finding is that, you know, this new climate of extreme that we will experience will have negative consequence and sometimes consequences that are sort of built on top of each other to create even more stress on our system moving forward. Next slide. This figure here shows some of those examples of cascading impact. So it's a busy figure. It takes a bit of time to read. So I encourage you after the webinar to look at the report and spend some time with it. But it sort of explains some of those relationship between different systems and how ultimately, if we don't pay attention or manage some of those threats, we will have more food and water insecurity in the US Caribbean. So the up and down arrows show the increasing or decreasing effect of a given climate change stressor on the food or the water system components. So, for example, increasing in frequency of a category 4 or 5 hurricane, which you know, it's likely to happen, as we've seen the previous years, will cause a decrease in the distribution of food and water. The effects of climate change are moderated by external influences, such as socioeconomic changes, that precondition the island to be more or less susceptible to climate changes. So the bottom line, though, is that we just need to start understanding some of those relationships, really sort of map them out, start bringing all the stakeholders to the table to then be able to figure out what we can do about them. Next slide. So the key message 4 relates to infrastructure energy system. And what we're finding is that those two systems, the infrastructure system, which are your ports, your airport, your wastewater treatment plant, etc., your energy system, which are your power plants, you know, some of the large solar farms that are in general managed by the utilities. What we find is that those systems are vulnerable, and decentralization can improve, could improve resilience if we were to sort of investigate more that route. So the first bullet under this key message is that climate change really has created profound risk for the US Caribbean critical infrastructure, because now we are dealing with new threats that are creating more opportunity for a system that is already weakened to break. The fact is, in the US Caribbean, both in Puerto Rico and in the US Virgin Islands, the infrastructure systems are already in a weakened state. And that is because of, you know, years of disinvestment and deferred maintenance, lack of attention to basically making sure that everything works properly. And so now that those shocks are sort of multiplying in terms of occurrence and intensity, we are facing more grave dangers, more difficulties to have them work when those events occur. So, for example, increasingly powerful storms with rising sea level are impairing critical infrastructure systems. And this is happening now, and we are seeing it to happen more and more in the future if nothing is being done. We also have a high dependence on fossil fuel. More and more people are investing in solar systems. Some of the utilities are investing in solar farm, but we are by and large, you know, 90% or more dependent on fossil fuel imports for our production of energy, electricity. And so this really increases our energy security the same way that our dependence on food import increases food insecurity. What happens elsewhere will impact our ability to secure what happened here, secure fuel to power the plants here. And then the last point is that infrastructure improvement coupled with a change in thoughts, right? A new paradigms focus on, you know, decentralization, adoption of distributed solar, making sure that, you know, everybody, or making sure that the who owns the solar, who manages solar gets distributed beyond just the power plant, and really a shared governance system involving community in decision-making and participating in this production of energy and managing of this energy could help limit our vulnerability to a disruption on infrastructure and energy system, and as a result, improve quality of life. Next slide. So this next slide sort of summarizes a lot of what I mentioned, especially the last bullet. So we are going from a centralized system to a decentralized system. This final decentralized system is, what we, the authors of the chapter, think may be a good compromise to ensure that everybody has access to, in this case, water and energy. But to get there, we will have to also go through a transition system. And the way that we move from centralized to transition to decentralized is by looking at issues of governance, slowly letting go of the central governance sort of system that we have in the territories, to ultimately getting to a more a shared governance system where decision-making is dispersed across actors. On the energy sector, moving away from the high dependence on fossil fuel and try to look, at a mix of both a large-scale and distributed energy system, where ultimately we can rely mostly on sun and wind to provide energy and limit our dependence on imported fuel system. And then for the water system, it's really sort of the same idea of diversifying sources of water, moving away from a central water system that is mostly the case for Puerto Rico, to a system where water can come from the potable municipal system, government system, as well as more water harvesting, rainwater harvesting by a community group or household. The key here, because some of you might say that this is probably true in the Virgin Islands where most people have a cistern. The key, though, the difference, what we are arguing for here is really making sure that the governance of those systems is taken into account and this governance is shared. So in the case of the Virgin Islands, that would mean, for example, that some entities would make sure that both those on the public water system and those on cistern would have access to secondary sources, or would be sort of considered when a shock caused by climate change would occur. And in Puerto Rico, it would be more distribution, more access to this rainwater harvesting system in addition to their current system. Next slide. So this is the fifth and last key message that really sort of address this issue of how are we going to get there, right? So this last key message is saying that the adaptation effectiveness increases when it is coupled with strategic governance and planning. So it's this question of governance is coming back, and this question of planning, or this theme of planning, is also coming back. So the first point that we're making is that climate adaptation in the Caribbean is challenging because there are a lot of interacting factors, including, our high risk exposure to a whole host of different types of hazards that are very, very destructive. There is also limited funding, and some of this funding is misaligned with existing priority. There is this lasting question of capacity. We have insufficient institutional and organizational capacity, meaning that at the end of the day, a few people do a lot of work. We don't have the same level of redundancy than other states in the mainland. But we also have siloed approach to risk reduction and resilience. So it will be important to start figuring out how to tackle some of those challenges. And it's extremely important to do it because effective adaptation to support resilience in the Caribbean could be enhanced through the co-development and integration of robust global, regional, and local climate science and risk-based knowledge into planning and implementation, as well as improved in governance arrangement. So, we could get out of this if we take the time to really think about, how can we maximize the network of knowledge, the fact that we are all living, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, but also the islands in the Caribbean, we are facing the same reality. So we could share a best method, we could share some form of knowledge-based resources. But most importantly, we need to improve our governance. And that leads us to the last point, which is, calling for more collaboration across the Caribbean. The US Caribbean, we are starting to work very closely with Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is starting to collaborate more with us, so this is good, you know, but we can learn more and increase our knowledge, but also our ability to adapt if we partner more with the wider Caribbean region. So next slide. For this slide, I will let Pablo first discuss where we at with Puerto Rico, and then I will discuss where we at with the USVI in terms of the status of adaptation action. Pablo?
Okay, thank you, Greg. Hello again. So actually what we're showing here with these slides is not necessarily a comparison between Puerto Rico and Virgin Islands, but we're showcasing where we are in terms of the policies, implementations, and assessment, and the different kind of actions and strategy that are being taken in both territories. In the case of Puerto Rico, for example, you will see the different kind of initiatives that are occurring not only at the government level, but also at the municipality level, but also with community-based organizations. So coming directly from the grassroots, from the down to up. So we are showcasing examples as the law, the Bill 33 of 2019, which created mandates and a committee to develop the first climate adaptation plan for the island of Puerto Rico, which already we have a first draft for that. There is an existing committee composed by different scientists, and also we already have the first draft on the climate adaptation. So we also have different initiatives that are occurring at the community level that are very important, that you will see in the report on how social transformation is occurring. In some cases, after the extreme weather events. So Maria, for example, was a game changer in the case of Puerto Rico on how communities are being organized and have been dealing with multiple issues in their region and in their communities. Greg, and I will stop there and I will leave it to you to explain a little bit more about the other one.
Yes, so thank you, Pablo. So in case of the USVI, as you can see, there's a fair amount of work to be done in pretty much all the various categories. There is, some categories that, are brighter than others, relatively speaking, such as the awareness and engagement and the policy and planning. So those are, we've made some progress, but as you can see, we have a fair amount of work to be done in order to get us where we need to be to start implementing adaptation strategies. I would say that, despite, what you could see here, you could maybe think, oh, wow, the situation is dire. Well, let me reassure you that there is a fair amount of work being done right now for the USVI to increase a little bit its scoring or its status, if you will, in all of those different categories. We are working very closely with a host of partners in the territory to increase awareness and engagement on the various issues that were discussed so far. There are even a fair amount of adaptation strategies that are being discussed, and funding is being pursued to test some of those right now. So the implementation section, if you will be soon better rated or have a better status. There is a lot of discussion about the assessment, work being done on coastal system, work being done on the drainage system and terrestrial system to try to think better how, to assess if what's going on and what type of adaptation strategies can be developed, etc. So work is being done despite this snapshot in time. Work is being done. I'm also glad to see that there are a fair amount of fellow Virgin Islanders attending this webinar who will also be able to spread the word and help push us in the territory to be a bit more aggressive, especially in the policy implementation aspect of things. So thank you very much, everybody.
Great. Thank you both so much.
Thank you,
all.
Alisa.
Yeah. Thank you all for this great presentation.